Hi, I'm Matt Williams. Welcome to Glimpses, where we talk about life, love, creativity, and all that spiritual stuff. My guest today is a remarkably talented writer and perhaps one of the funniest people in America. By the way, there's no pressure to be funny.
No pressure at all.
No pressure to be funny. This man has won so many awards that I couldn't count them, so I got lazy and I did a cut and paste from his Wikipedia page, okay? So
Wikipedia? Okay.
Yeah, Wikipedia. But I kind of edit it because it goes on and on and on.
Okay.
Alan Zweibel is an American television writer, author, playwright, and screenwriter whom the New York Times says has earned a place in the pantheon of American pop culture. You're in the pantheon.
You know something? I don't know where this pantheon is, but if I ever come across it, I'm going to look for myself.
Well, I was thinking maybe you have to buy a toga.
Oh, I got plenty of that.
Okay, you got toga.
I'm all set.
Okay, you got togas. He is an original Saturday Night Live writer. Zweibel has won 5 Emmy Awards and 2 Writers Guild of America Awards for his work in television, which includes It's Garry Shandling Show and Curb Your Enthusiasm. And he was awarded the Thurber Prize for American Humor, and he has won a Tony Award for the Broadway production of 700 Sundays with Billy Crystal. He has written 11 books, as well as numerous plays and feature films, and it is my very great pleasure to welcome Alan Zweibel to Glimpses.
Thanks for having me, Matt. This is great.
I'm really thrilled. I haven't seen you in many years, so
No,
this is a treat.
but you look great. I mean, I'd recognize you just about anywhere. Okay.
I'm going to start with this. When did you know you were funny?
I guess high school. We moved from one school to another. I moved from one school to another in 10th grade, which is sort of tough to do. And everybody knew each other since kindergarten. And all of a sudden I was saying things and people were laughing, and it helped me make friends. I'm going, well, this is fun, you know? And then...
So you were around 13, 14 years old?
Yeah, something like that, where all of a sudden, these, you know, look, making your siblings or your parents laugh, you know, that's easy. They know you and supposedly love you. But when you make strangers, new people laugh, you go, hey, this is okay. I'll follow this, you know? And then I remember watching, oh God, I must have been about 14 when the Dick Van Dyke Show came on the air.
Of course.
Okay, everyone our age says that was the show. And I remember sitting with my parents, watching the Dick Van Dyke Show. This good-looking guy wrote for TV, had a very nice house in New Rochelle, married to Mary Tyler Moore, had a son, Richie, so he had a family. And at work, every day he lied on a couch and he was joking around with Buddy and Sally. And I said, I want to do that. Okay. Now, how do you get to do that?
And you got to do it.
Got to do it. I got to do it. And it was every dream I ever had came, you know, as the years went by. When I was in college, I started sending in jokes to Carson was the host of the Tonight Show. Dick Cavett had a show. I started sending things to Mad Magazine. And I still have a book of all the rejections. It's about an inch thick with all these sheets of papers. Some of them were formed letters, but some of them were actually personal letters, which were encouraging. They were encouraging in their rejections.
But see, you write jokes, and I tell people I can't write a joke to save my life. I can think funny, and if the character's funny, the writing's funny. But you write jokes. And we're going to talk
Sure.
more about that, but that's how you started writing jokes, right?
Yes, I did. When I got out of college, about 34, 35, law school said, no, you don't want to be a lawyer. They all got together, these guys. They looked at my board scores and said, this is a waste of everybody's time. So I started writing jokes for comics who played in the Catskill Mountains. This is, I graduated college in 72, so 72, 73.
Right.
$7 a joke. That was the going rate at the time. Now, prior to my arrival there, that was a viable way to get into television writing because you wrote for comics.
Right.
And if those comics became hot and were offered a TV show, they would take their writers with
Got
them.
it.
Okay. So the Toady Fields of the world and Dean Martin, Jerry Lewis, Red Buttons, and as they became popular and they made the move. By the time I got there, anybody who was going to make it had already left. So I was left with every Freddie, Morty, Dickie, and Lee that ever lived. $7 a joke they paid me. They treated me really well, and it was really a kick because when growing up on Long Island, that's where we used to go on holiday with the family. With the 4 kids and my
Right.
parents, we'd get into the station wagon and go to the Nevele, the Concord, Grossingers. And I was too young to go to the nightclubs, but I would sneak in, stand in the back and watch the comics. And now I was writing for them. So it was a kick, you know.
That is great. Now, so I tell my students at Columbia, you can't teach someone how to be funny. So when you conceive of a joke, one of my questions was, do you envision a gag? Do you hear the joke? Is it a rhythm? Is it an impulse? What is the birth of a joke in Alan Zweibel's brain?
It can work a number of ways. And like anything else, something can hit. And you're absolutely right. When you have a character, well, you write for the character. And the joke itself is not necessarily funny, but there's attitude, there's personality. It wasn't until I started writing for, let's say, Rodney Dangerfield that I was writing for a character. You know, so it was easy when he said, I don't get no respect. It was easy for me to say, even as an infant, my mother wouldn't breastfeed me. She said she liked me as a friend. Okay, that was character, right? But until then, the jokes had to stand on their own because those comics up there didn't have distinct personalities. Right. They all wore tuxedos. They probably shared the same false teeth. Okay, but the joke, but they were all interchangeable. I remember. Oh, so the first. There was a comic up there named Morty Gunty, okay?
Okay.
Yeah, he's not exactly a household name. And he called up, and I'm 21, he's like 44. So it's like writing for my parents' generation. But he said to me, sperm banks. I go, what about him? He said, can you give me some sperm bank jokes? So the first joke, I got $7. This is what... made me a professional comedy writer. I wrote a joke for him. I said they have a new thing now called sperm banks, which is just like an ordinary bank, except here, after you make a deposit, you lose interest, okay? $7 a joke, $7. So that made me a professional. So then about a week or so later, I got a phone call from another Catskill comic named Freddie Roman. And he said to me, hey, I heard you write great sperm bank jokes. So I'm going, how did I become this guy? why am I that guy now? So can you give me any? So for him, what did I do? They were starting to freeze sperm. I said, that could be a problem in the future because it's hard enough telling a kid he's been adopted. How do you tell him he's been defrosted? Okay, so now we're up to $14. Okay. It wasn't like I just dashed right out of the blocks, just stumbling along like that. But it was in answer to your question, those were easy because, okay, banks, sperming, but the joke that got me the job ultimately on SNL, I had a binder that had 1,100 jokes in it that I had written for those guys.
1,100
Literally
jokes.
1,100 jokes. And Lorne Michaels, what I had done was I got tired of writing for those Catskill guys. After a couple of years, I'm working in a delicatessen to supplement this great living that I was making as a comedy writer. And I said, no, the Catskills are dead. These people are twice my age. So there were 2 clubs in New York at the time. There was Catch a Rising Star and the Improv, okay?
Of course.
So that's where Richard Lewis, my friend Larry David, Elaine Boozler, they were Robert Klein. So I went there, and the plan was to take all the jokes those old guys wouldn't buy from me because they said it was too hip for the room. I'm hip. All of a sudden, I'm hip. Okay, so, and I went on stage, and I told my jokes with the hopes that a manager or an agent would come, like the writing, and want to represent me to become a TV writer.
Right.
And the first week that I'm there, I meet another guy just starting out. His name is Billy Crystal. He lived about 4 towns over from where I moved back home.
Right.
He, so he would pick me up every night. We would drive in his little blue Volkswagen into the city, and we'd go on stage, tell our jokes, and on the way home, we would listen to the cassettes of our respective sets, and we would say, that joke works. What if you told this way? And
Really?
and we would give each other notes. And I'm about 4 months into this experiment, and I'm on stage. It's like 1 o'clock in the morning, and I'm having the hardest time in the world making these 6 drunks from Des Moines laugh. Okay, I get off the stage, and I'm sitting at the bar holding my hand. I'm waiting for Billy to give me a ride home. And a guy comes up and he looks at me and he just starts shaking his head. And I go, "What?" He said, you're the worst comedian I've ever seen in my life. I said, "Well, that's great to hear that, because it's really helping me at this time with my head in my hand, And he said, "But the writing isn't bad. Did you write it?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Could I see more?" It was Lorne Michaels.
Incredible.
And he was, so maybe April of '75, and he's going to all the clubs looking for writers for this new show that would start in October. I went home, sat down at my mom and dad's kitchen table, typed up those 1,100 jokes, went into the city a couple of days later for my interview with Lorne, and he opened the binder and he read the first joke. And this is a long-winded way of telling you that, because any time anybody asks him about me, this joke, I had written a joke saying that, this is how long ago it was from the reference points, the post office is about to issue a stamp commemorating prostitution in the United States, 10-cent stamp. If you want to lick it, it's a quarter, okay? So that was the joke. And that joke took me about 2 weeks to write.
Did it really?
Whereas the sperm bank jokes, they were easy. The thing for Rodney was, because you just say, "Like me as a friend," that
Right.
was easy. As a matter of fact, in my most recent book called Laugh Lines, My Life Helping Funny People Be Funnier, I talk about the process of writing that joke. It was 1975, so the next year was the bicentennial.
Right.
And the post office did announce that it was going to come out with commemorative stamps celebrating the 200th anniversary of the country. So it was wars, it was Betsy Ross, it was all these historical people and events. So the process was, okay, what would be a funny thing to do? So I came up with prostitution. It is so XXX rated. Until I came up with "You Want to Lick It, It's a Quarter," I had to stamp moaning. I had to stamp growing legs and spreading. It was disgusting what I had. And finally, "If you want to lick it, it's a quarter." But it did take a long time and a lot of iterations to set it up. Okay, what is the punchline to this? And that became that. And it was on the very first Saturday Night Live ever. Chevy did it in Weekend Update. So that's what made me a TV writer, was that joke.
But here's what I want people to hear. It took you 2 weeks to write, refine, hone that joke.
Right.
I think people think Alan's funny, Billy Crystal's funny. They just sit down and knock out jokes. They don't realize the work that goes into crafting a joke, right?
Well, the word craft is the accurate word,
Right.
because it's the operative word here. Because once again, some things are just knee-jerk funny. It strikes you as something and you jot it down. Yeah, you might play with the wording a little bit, but the essence is there. In this particular case, with this particular joke, yes, there was a delicacy to it, because I didn't want it to be vile. Right. I didn't want it to be, but I wanted it to be, well, it was there. Stamp. Okay, what do you do with a stamp? We told that joke on SNL. Chevy was in the first Weekend Update ever, and it was the thing that made me a professional television writer. It was the first thing I ever wrote that was on TV.
That's what's frightening about social media. Something that you wrote in '75, they can pop up on their phone in
like
3
that.
seconds.
It's unbelievable that there's nothing that's not documented one way or another. We used to go out of our way to leave a paper trail. You know what I mean? Because we felt it was good in terms of our progeny and just, how because I'm always fascinated by how we got to this place.
Right.
You know, I look at Second City, and if you had a genealogical chart, and you had Mike Nichols and Elaine May and all those people and what they did, and it's fascinating. And you can do the same thing with SNL. There's 50 years, or just about 50 years, for God's sake. But the word crafting, I didn't want it to be pornographic, although it could have been. But at the same time, I knew that there had to be, the setup was so, well, I won't say strong, but at the same time, it left you expecting something, and it had to meet the setup, okay? Right. So that took quite a while, whereas other things just come to mind and you write it down. You know, I admire joke writers where you write 12 words, 15 words, and you start, and by the time you get to the end, your audience is laughing. It's an incredible craft. And I used to watch like Carson do his monologue, or any of those guys. This is when I was growing up, and it wasn't out of character. Yeah, he had a bit of a character because he was a personality, but whereas Bob Hope never made me laugh.
Yeah,
and he was supposed to be America's comic and our ambassador all over the world, and I never got it, you know. But
well, let's talk. I want to ask you something about Saturday Night Live because you're talking about writing for character or a persona. Was it easier once you had an ensemble that you were writing for? If you had Chevy Chase and Dan Aykroyd and Gilda and people like that, did that make it easier?
It made it incredibly easier. It was, before we started rolling here, we were talking about the synergy of either a writer's room or a creative atmosphere.
Right.
So those, Gilda I wrote a lot for. I wrote the Samurais for John Belushi. A lot of characters. These were characters that John Belushi, he auditioned for the show doing the samurai character.
Oh, really?
Okay, and another writer named Tom Schiller wrote a sketch called Samurai Hotel. Okay, and it worked. And a couple of shows later, Buck Henry was coming in to host, and I idolized Buck Henry, The Graduate and Get Smart, and just as a persona, I just idolized him. Lorne came up to me and he said, you worked in a deli before you got this job, right? I went, yeah. He said, you think you can write Samurai Deli? I went, piece of cake. He leaves. I'm going, what the hell am I going to, what the fuck what does that mean? All right. And I wrote it, and I wrote the next 10 or 11 of them. But there was a character. And Schiller made it come to life in Samurai Hotel. Gilda, there was a character called Roseanne
Classic.
Well, what had happened was this really funny writer named Rosie Schuster wrote a public service announcement called Hire the Incompetent, okay, where she had 3 vignettes of these people who were total screw-ups, and we were supposed to hire them despite the fact, and Gilda, for her vignette, put on a wig and had a dialect and was talking about how she got fired from a Burger King kind of place, and she's saying it while she's just like rubbing her armpit because they said they found a hair or something. So I was having dinner with Gilda a couple of months later, and I said, "Listen, remember that character? Why don't we?" I'm producing Weekend Update at the point at that time. I said, "Let's move her into Update, and give her a name, and let her do Consumer Reports." And she got a letter every week from a guy named Richard Fader from Fort Lee, New Jersey. It's my brother-in-law. Okay? Okay. So all of a sudden it became a thing. Rosie doesn't write that. I can't come up with that. I didn't come up with that. But the character I saw, when we gave it a name, we gave it a life, a different life. But when you have really funny people around you, whether they're writers or actors, all those actors you mentioned, they may not have been disciplined writers where they sat at a typewriter until 2 in the morning writing a sketch. But if Gilda comes into my office and says, I want to play Debbie Doody, Howdy Doody's wife, I go, all right, let's do it, So they were writers, not disciplined, right, but they were improv actors. And I remember any time that I write something for Belushi, he'd look at it and he goes, all right, I'm going to go out there and save your ass again. Okay, all right. He used to piss on everything that I wrote. So it is easier. It's Marilyn Miller, who was one of the writers, it was, hey kids, let's put on a show. And that's exactly what it was. Lorne had created an atmosphere where the only rule that we had, he said, let's make each other laugh.
Yeah.
And if we do that, we'll put it on television. And he assured us that there was this baby boomer generation that had our sense of humor, listened to our music. It was like Woodstock, just a couple of years after Woodstock was 69, this was 75. Watergate was a year before. It was 74.
Incredible.
So you think about the changes that were going on, and he said that's the audience that we're playing to, us.
Yeah.
And my God, it's 47, 48 years later.
I'll tell you how indelible it is. I mean, as soon as you said Rosanna Dana, right?
Right.
I still, it's been this many years ago. As soon as you said that, I thought of her sitting there going, what's this about too many violins on TV?
Well, see, that was Emily Latella.
Oh, was that Emily Latella?
Emily Latella.
I remember the joke about the violins on
TV. Emily Latella was, once again, it was a bunch of writers. I didn't name her Emily Latella. I think Tom Davis did, who was half of the writing team of Al Franken and Tom Davis.
Right.
The character, the little old lady, was based on a nanny that Gilda had growing up. The nanny's name was Dibby, and she was hard of hearing.
Right.
Okay. So she wanted to come on Weekend Update and do editorial replies that she misheard.
That's it.
Okay. So violins on television, and I started writing for, there was making Puerto Rico a steak instead of a state. Presidential erections, I think the lowest we got before we put the skids on it was endangered feces, okay? And so she would be corrected and then go, never mind, And what was really funny was, I think it was the endangered feces thing. Everybody was saying, okay, it's enough already, because people were writing in and giving suggestions. And many times they were better than ours, And but I wanted to give it a little bit longer of a shelf life. So Jane Curtin is now the anchor person on Weekend Update, and Gilda comes in, and let's say it was endangered feces. Then she's corrected, and then she says, never mind. And at this point, it's like sort of like a little titter in the audience. And it's at dress rehearsal, which is done in front of a full audience. I elongated it. I had Jane Curtin say to her, listen, you come on this show every week. You get the subject wrong. You make a fool of yourself. You undermine our journalistic integrity. He says, I don't want to ever see you again. Am I making myself clear? I had Gilda say, crystal clear. And then she took a beat, and under her breath, she went, bitch. Now, this is 1977. So I got a huge laugh. But between dress and air, we had a censor named Jane Crowley, who was about as big as this room, okay? And dress shields, ex-nun, you know who I'm talking about. So she comes waddling out, and she says, Alan, we can't do this when we go on the air. We can't do what? She says, you can't say bitch. I said, Jane, I really wanted to get bitch on television. I said, Jane, please listen to me. When Gilda says bitch, she's using the adverb form of the word. In effect, she's saying, Jane, you are acting bitchy toward me. Adverb. I said, she's not saying, Jane, you are a bitch, which is a noun, and I agree should never be on television. This is an adverb. And she said, let me think about it. She goes into the control room, picks up a phone, calls God, I guess, and comes waddling out. And she says, Alan, because it's an adverb, you can say bitch. And that's how bitch got on television. I know that Lorne got involved somehow, too, in some meeting that I wasn't a part of. But, yeah. But once again, you're inspired by these people, have ideas of their own, and they present you with characters, or it's the... it's the synergy of two people. I've always felt like, I felt this when I wrote with Garry Shandling, when we created a show for him, that we were about, and these are arbitrary numbers, 80% the same, which is what attracted us to each other. But you know, Matt, I mean, the other 20%, you each bring something that the other person could not have thought of.
Absolutely.
Okay? So the product is, yeah, that's the collaboration. It's something I couldn't do by myself, you know? And that's what's fun.
You have collaborated with Billy Crystal, Dave Barry, Garry Shandling, and many, many more.
Sure.
What you were explaining that you're 80% the same, and you each bring your 20% of your uniqueness to the collaboration. Talk about the process. Do you just spitball? Does one write a draft? Do you exchange pages, or do you just start spitballing in the room with a writer's assistant? How do you collaborate with these people?
Well, individually, I mean, I can go one by one. Look, it's easiest if you're in the room with somebody, and because you come up with something that's based on or built from something that the other person says in the moment.
Right.
Okay. So that's easy. It's like, excuse me, it's like being at a party. It's like it's a social thing. All right. But it's work, but it's fun. And if you don't have an ego about it, you'll both know when, okay, that's it. Okay.
Right.
Whether it's said individually or it's done collaboratively, which is one person building on the other, creating this other thing. But I've written books with Dave Barry, who lives in books. He lives in Coral Gables, Florida. I live in New Jersey. And we wrote a book that we just wrote the screenplay for. We're handing it in tonight or tomorrow. And it was called Lunatics. And I said to him, we met each other, and we liked each other, and we saw each other on book tour. And I said, let's write something together. And I said, well, why don't we do a novel? He said, well, how are we going to do that? How do you do it anyway?
Right.
All right. So I came up with something. His daughter, Sophie, was playing in a soccer league. She was like 11 or 12 at the time. I said, why don't we do this? Here's the situation. There's a girls' championship soccer team, right? And one girl kicks what looks like the winning goal to win the championship. The ref calls her offsides. So there's a local feud between the girl's father, a soccer dad, and the ref. And it starts off as a local feud. Let's follow it. Who knows, maybe there'll be a new pope as a result of this feud. So we wrote this book, and Dave Barry, because he is a Pulitzer Prize winning humorist, and he appeared in God knows how many newspapers when he was syndicated, he churns it out really quickly. Okay. So I sent him a chapter, and each chapter was about 4 or 5 pages long. You didn't want to get involved too much into one person's thing until they got together. And then,
Right.
So I sent him 4 or 5 pages, and my character was very demure, very, very straight-laced, good citizen, totally politically correct. This was 10 years ago.
Uh-huh.
I send it to Dave. He sends me, so what takes me 4 or 5 days to write? A day later that night, all of a sudden, in my inbox are these pages, and he comes up with the most vile, bawdy character in the world, which is the girl's father, and I was the ref. So now it's like I'm reacting to him. I send it to him. He reacts to me, and we follow the story. So in that particular case, we would still be writing it if the editor didn't say, guys, I handed in on the 15th, so we got to end this thing. But, and it worked great. And except Dave tells this story. He said it was working great, and we didn't bother editing each other. It was unbridled. The only time that he called me was, he said, Alan, I really like your last chapter, but I'm at a loss here. I go, why? He says, well, at the end of the chapter, you killed off everyone in the book. I don't know who to write for. I go, oh, you mean they wouldn't survive jumping from the top of an ocean liner into... No, Alan, they would... Okay, fine. So I tweaked it, okay, so he can continue writing. But there was a case where 2 people, once again, similar sensibilities, right, but different enough where I could not have written his character and vice versa. Martin Short, when I collaborated with him on his Broadway
right,
show, he, the most, these characters, I could never have thought of Jiminy Glick.
Right.
I could, or any of his characters. So there, once again, if you train your ear, you can contribute. You can help. I remember when I first got out of college, and what I did as an exercise, because all those guys in the Catskills all were the same person, I would sit down and I'd go, okay, This week the subject is buying a house. Monday, I would write a monologue as if Jack Benny was buying a house. Tuesday, as if Joan Rivers was buying a house. Wednesday, Flip Wilson or Cosby or at the time or whatever, David Steinberg. By the end of the week, I'd have 5 monologues about the same subject, but with different. I was training my ear to capture different voices. So if I meet a guy like Garry Shandling, right, or meet a guy like Dave Barry, and I go, all right, I know their voice. Well, Dave isn't a good example of that because he's a pure writer. It's not like I'm writing for him to perform.
Right.
Okay. But if you can capture the person's voice, like Billy Crystal, okay, this will be. I think this will be funny coming out of his mouth, and it's. And once again, and I learned this with Shandling, a little bit at SNL, but with Shandling, we had a couple of squabbles because I felt that this was the right joke, and if he didn't want to do it, he wouldn't say it with conviction. Okay, so then you have this talk. You go, all right, listen, the reason I gave you that joke, here was the intent. The intention was this, and in that point in the script, we need you to say something like that. If you don't like these exact words, well, think of another joke. But if you agree with me that this is what the story needs, this is what the character has to express at this point, then we'll write something different. And then you have a different conversation. Right. Oh, I see what you meant by that. I don't want to say it that way, but what if I say it this way? So you tailor a new joke to fit that situation.
Well, your new book, the subtitle, if I've got it correct, is helping you help funny people be funnier.
Well, my life helping funny people.
My life helping funny people be funnier.
Yeah.
And you just explained how you do that. And you really do have a remarkable ear, like Billy Crystal or Garry, that you can pick up on the cadence. I find that remarkable, those monologues that you said, writing for different people. And I think playwrights should hear this, people that write for television should hear this, so that you don't just get locked into one voice. And especially in TV, where you're writing for multiple characters.
You don't want everybody to sound the same. You want people to have distinct personalities and distinct point of views. You know, and I think of some of the classic TV shows, you know, lore has it, and I think it's true, but it could be urban legend, that the longest sustained laugh in the history of radio came out of silence.
Jack Benny.
Jack Benny.
I know the story, but please tell it.
Well, Jack Benny was known as the cheap guy. He
Yes.
was really stingy. And in radio, he's walking along. A bad guy comes, sticks a gun in his back, and he says, your money or your life. And the longer he didn't answer, the louder and louder the laughter became from the radio,
Yes.
the studio audience, was because they knew that he was mulling it over, okay? And then when the laugh started to dip a little bit, they had the bad guy say, well, and then Jack Benny said, I'm thinking about it, okay? And it shot up again. So to create a character, like if you looked at All in the Family, if Archie Bunker was coming up the steps of his house, and we, the audience, saw that Jefferson, the African-American, was sitting in his chair, we laughed in anticipation
Right.
of what Archie would say once he opened the door and saw that. Right. Well, that's character writing. That's great character writing. And you don't even, if it came out of silence, and if it came out of silence with the other example I gave, how ingrained are those characters in our brains that they didn't have to say anything? And it's just like anything else. Nobody speaks in jokes. Okay,
Right.
We all have friends who are funny, and you always say, "Oh, just imagine him saying that," or "You had to be there," or whatever it is. It's character.
Yeah, and I define this for my students with worldview. I go, what is your character's worldview? And it can be going all the way back to Commedia. It can be the Lotzi, their shtick.
Yes.
They're cheap. They're the hot one. Capitano, the braggart, who is actually a coward. But you find that worldview or that Lotzi or that thing that is that character. And I use Mary Tyler Moore as an example because those characters were so well defined.
Oh yeah.
And I don't think I'm making this up because I use it as an example where Mary was taking a bubble bath and Ted walked in the room and he said something and his car keys fell into the bathtub. And the same thing as Jack Benny. There was no, all you have to do is look. You don't have to say anything. And because the audience knew the characters so well. And to me, that's great comedy when the comedy comes out of character.
Absolutely. You know, my wife and I were in LA a couple of weeks ago, and we passed the Beverly Hills Police Department. And we used to live there for 16, 17 years. So, you know, but it was nostalgic. We're driving around. And I said, boy, you know what comes to mind with the Beverly Hills Police Department? Do you remember the episode on Jack Benny? He went down to the police department, the Beverly Hills one, and the police dogs in Beverly Hills were these big standard poodles that had all these quaffs and stuff like that. And just watching Jack Benny react to the dogs was hilarious. Not to say that nobody else would let, but it was something, the coupling of his reaction to it, you know.
I'm going to ask you, since you brought her up, I'm not going to pry into your private life.
Go ahead.
But Robin, you've been married since 1979.
Mm-hmm.
Someone in show business that's been married that long with 3 kids and 5 grandchildren. Is it still 5?
It's still 5. Yeah.
It's still 5. How did you do it? What is the secret? I mean, really, that, and I'm not being flip here. Well, you think of people that work, I've only been married 36 years, but people in show business maintaining a marriage that long. What was your secret?
I think what was very helpful was the fact that Robin worked on SNL. That's where we met.
Oh, okay.
She was a production assistant. So, so she saw firsthand sort of what she would be getting herself into. But what I did was also, this was, so let's say this was 78-ish before we got married, when we were dating. Neil Simon had a play that was going to be opening on Broadway this particular week. So he wrote a piece for the Sunday New York Times Arts and Leisure section. Okay, and I think it later became a preface of one of his anthologies. And in it, he described the comedy writer as a 2-headed monster. One head goes through life. You know, you go to the ATM, you go to the dentist, you get stuck in traffic. But then another head, without announcement or provocation, emerges, hovers over the first head, and starts making fun of the life that this guy is living.
Yes.
And I said to her, I said, please read this, because I think this is what you'll be getting yourself into. And look, 44 years, you know, the kids have senses of humor, the grandkids do. I'm not saying it's been every day, it's been a day at the beach, you know.
No.
But there's a component there which is based on, look, I'll tell you very briefly how we met. I mean, this was pre-production, the 3rd year of SNL. And so we kept civil hours. She first got the job there as the show secretary, but to get the job, she lied about her typing skills, right? Okay. So now everybody's going home at 6 o'clock. I'm packing up, and my office was right near the reception area, outside of Lorne Michaels' office. And as I'm getting ready to leave from the reception area, remember the typewriters, the Selectrics that had that ball thing, and it made a loud. Absolutely, yes. I hear a and then 5 seconds later I hear another and then 7 another go. What the hell is that? And I go in and I see that she's looking. Oh, there's the 7. You know. Oh, okay, an M. Okay, and I'm going. Wow. All right. So I sit down. The desks were facing each other, just the way you and I are right now.
Right. Right.
And I see her head is down, and she's really, literally hunting and pecking. And I thought she was, you know, I don't know if you're allowed to say this anymore, but she was really pretty. I'll handle that mail. And I wanted to get her attention. Nobody's around, and the door to Lauren's office is open, but no one's around. And I clear my throat. She doesn't look up. I open up the drawer of whoever desk I was sitting at, and there's a box of paper clips. I take a paper clip and I throw it, and it hits her typewriter, and she doesn't look up. She just continues the task. Then I throw another one, hits her shoulder. Okay, she doesn't look up. Finally, I'm getting pissed. I take the whole box. I mean, it'd been like 100 clips. I throw it, and 100 clips come raining down on her head. She never looks at me. She stops typing. She stands, walks around the desk, goes into Lorne's office, comes out wearing a pith helmet that he had hanging on a hat on a coat rack, and she sits down, and it was one of those pith helmets that you push a button and the red thing at the top goes beep boop beep boop, and she puts it, and now she never looked at me once, and I go, okay, boy, now it's just a matter of how long can I put off making a commitment, because I knew that. So and I'm sure, I mean, you're married as long as you are also, that what attracted you to each other, what are you like at your best, and if it's based on funny.
Yeah.
Boy, what a
Funny has a lot to do with it.
It sure does.
When I was writing Home Improvement, and it got to the point where there was one taping where you talked about the two heads where you watch Angelina sitting there, and I went, oh, shit. I leaned over and I said, some of this may sound familiar.
Oh, God.
And almost every argument we had for 3 years ended up on Home Improvement in some version or another.
Sure.
Because even in the midst of this passionate argument, and why did you do this, and how could you say that? There's that part of your brain, that other head going, ooh, that's funny. That could be.
It's taking it down.
And it's taking it down. And that is so correct, what you described.
Well, it's interesting. I hearken back to when we first started. Larry David is still my close pal. But when we were all starting out, and let's say we were hanging out at the Improv, we would go out, let's say for coffee or something after, 1 a.m. or something like that. So we'd be in a coffee shop, and it would be me and Larry David, and two other comics who were maybe Richard Lewis, who were around at the time. There was a guy named Bob Shaw. And we'd be talking. Now, if something big happened, like somebody dropped something, all of us would take out our little pads, write it down, and put it back in our pocket, to make note of something that happened. But Larry, we would be talking about something, and all of a sudden, he would take out his little notebook and write something, and we're all going, what happened? What did we miss? Okay. So he's like on a different plane than everybody. He was like, and to this day, I mean, with all his success, and there are some people who think differently than other people, and you just sit back and you go, wow.
Yeah, it's amazing. I'm going to talk about glimpses because that's the name of this podcast. That's why you're watching and listening. And the name of the book is Glimpses, a Writer's Take on Life, Love, and all that spiritual stuff. And
it's a great title.
And the book encourages to find little glimpses of God in your daily life. And by God, I'm not talking about the guy in the burning bush, I really believe that's either George Burns or George Carlin. I'm not for sure.
It's some George.
It's some George. But by glimpses of God, I mean moments of grace, unexpected kindness, tenderness. And I realized, Alan, that we were getting so cynical in and around COVID and all the stuff happening in Washington and everything. And people were saying, we're doomed, life's a shitstorm, it's all over. And I said, I don't believe that, because if you look around, if you really look, you find little glimpses of God everywhere. And do you see those moments of tenderness and kindness in your life? And,
absolutely.
Yeah.
And what happened, I think, for all of us, whether we're conscious of it or not, is during COVID, when we were all living the same lives and people were dying, and now it's post-COVID, but every week somebody our age is dying.
Right.
Richard Lewis went public the other day that he's got Parkinson's. Okay.
Right.
And I think that what's happened is, and now that we're in our 70s,
right,
I think time has become more precious. Who am I going to spend time with? How am I going to spend my time?
Right.
Because it doesn't last forever. And I do think that the people and the things that we love, we embrace more, we appreciate more. And as far as finding those glimpses that you're talking about, my friend Billy Crystal calls it God winking. Okay,
yes.
Those little things that, wait a second, that number was from here, but it's appearing over here, or a song that reminds you of somebody. I was just thinking of them, and all of a sudden, the next song on the radio is one that you made out to, okay,
Right.
or whatever it is. And I personally believe that I go through my life thinking that we're not born, and we're given these bodies,
Right.
and then the bodies eventually betray us. They break down. They don't work anymore, and we either go back to wherever we were before we were born. Because I don't know. Nobody's come back to tell us. But at the same time, I do believe that whatever is in your heart stays in your heart, and I think we have to listen to it.
I couldn't say that any better. And with that, I think we'll wrap it up.
Well, I've had a great time. I loved using your bathroom, and I don't think you're paying Matthew enough. By
Okay.
the way, he showed me where it was, and
Okay.
he gave me an option too.
Okay. Yeah. Alan Zweibel, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
And for all of you, thank you for joining us on this podcast. And as you go about your day, I encourage you to take the time to look around and catch a glimpse. Thanks.